Okay, so hi everyone, local and online. We're online again for the fourth and final talk on our series this year on telemedicine and e-health. Another guest and another different topic, now coming from academia, coming from engineering, and I think it's going to be extremely interesting to complement all the topics we've been discussing this year. And so there's great pleasure to have a colleague and a friend, Professor Enrico Grisam, currently at the London South Bank University for the last 6 years, associate professor in artificial intelligence, the coordinator of the Center for Biomedical and Biosciences. It's a complicated name. Bioengineering. You will correct me, but and after the previous experience, since postdoc, professor, etc., at the University of Padova in Italy, so 17 years there. I also work in computer vision, a lot of times related to health data and health challenges. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about algorithms, for this specific local crowd, something slightly different than what we're used to talking about. But I think it's important to see these perspectives. And thank you, Enrico, for being here and for sharing this with us. So we'll do the same as usual. We'll have an initial talk. It's being transmitted and recorded. And then we'll stop that online part and we'll have the question and answers and interactions just for here locally. Okay? So, okay. Enrico, thank you very much.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation and to have abducted me from London, where it's freezing cold, to nice Porto. So really enjoying the morning. Before starting, just to have a little bit of feeling of your background, how many with computer science, engineering, and medicine and biology? So there's a couple missing. What is your background? Nursing. Okay, perfect. So the idea is to give you an overview of, well, the opportunities, but also the challenges of putting together data from very different domains, from very different sources, to get a better understanding of a patient status or the trajectory of a disease or something like that. And I'm sorry for the title, so excludable unum. That is, of course, from many sources, getting one solution or one. I just discovered yesterday that is also the motto of the Benfica. So not sure it is. And also it is on, this I knew, but I took the chance, it is $1 bill. So both of the things is not really on the top of goodness lately, but let's go with that. So for those with no computer science, I will provide some of the architecture that I've used, but I've given you the sense of that, because the sense of that, the sense of going behind the scene can give you also the idea of why things are working or not working and why there are some challenges. So first of all, where multimodality is coming from. So it's all started 20 years ago with the first neural networks and deep learning model applied to computer vision. So the question was, can we understand scenes? Can we take a picture and tell automatically what there is in the picture, or what are the main aspects, or the relationship between objects in the picture? And this is one of the most successful architectures that you can use. There are also web applications that you can go browsing using YOLO. You only look once, and basically they train on millions and millions of images that have been painfully annotated by saying, oh, here there's a person, there's a car, there's a building, a window, and so on and so forth. And at the end, what you get is something like this. So an image with boxes around objects. And each object is labeled with what it represents. So here you have person, One of the lady is holding umbrellas and bags, so that you have boxes around umbrella and bags and so on and so forth. And then at the same time, there was a question about, yes, boxes might not be enough because they separate objects, but they're very rough in understanding what's in the object. So if you want to quantify things, to measure things, they're not very useful. And the other idea was, can we put together boxes with what is called segmentation? So you divide all the scene into different parts, and you assign a label to each part. Something like what you have here, in which you not only have boxes around each object, but you have also the contouring of the objects that cover the whole scene. So this is started in 2015 with the first successful use of deep learning, and evolved, and is still evolving now. And now it's widespread, and you can get this model in your app or through web interfaces. And when the success in computer vision was kind of going on and established, people started to think, oh, can we use the same approaches in that domain? And the most obvious domain that was whose study was going on for a long, long time was, can we understand text and language? And so the other big domain of application of deep learning models was language. Can we have automatic ways of reading a text and understanding what's important, or understanding what it's saying and maybe summarizing them, or highlighting what is important? Or, well, there was a lot of push from the web vendors, Amazon, for example, to automatically understand what the reviews of the things they were selling were they positive reviews or negative reviews. And the same thing then was starting with Netflix. Can you understand the reviews of movies? And so the analysis was, can we take a text and give an answer based on this text in an automatic way? And of course, it all started a different development that was parallel to the computer vision we have seen before, and landed in 2018 with the development of ChatGPT, basically, or GPTs, that then was embedded in an interface to give you the possibility of chatting with an automatic language generator. And this was basically a big deep learning model, big neural network architecture. We'll be seeing the basics in a moment, that was trained on billions of texts, snippets, books, whatever was found on the internet, and was trying to make sense of how the language was built. And the side effect of this understanding is that the model could generate reasonable text. So you can ask, can you generate me a poetry about sunshine in Porto in the style of Yeats? And since somewhere in the training, in the learning phase, it was exposed to poems by Yeats, it can put words together that resemble the style of Yeats, and that makes some sense. And then these things fed back in the computer vision, saying, oh, look what they've done for language models. They've used all these architectures, and now they can generate text. Can we do the same for images? And then some others thought, oh, now you can generate text, we can understand images. But instead of having something like this, in which we just say, oh, here we have boxes, and two boxes have the label players, one box of the label ball, then you have a box with field and so on. Can we put this information together in a narrative way so that it is familiar and nice for a human reader? And so the question behind this is, can we put together images and text? And the most obvious thing is, can we have a system that automatically takes an image and describe what is an image? And the first attempt were we can use the model we have for segmenting all the objects in the image. We take what the labels are in, we just feed into the language model, and the language model just take the labels and reorganize in a nice way. So you have a nice caption. But then, in principle, if you have enough example of images and a description of what's in the image, you can bypass the part of extracting first what's in the image and then translating it into language, and you can do it in one shot. And the big question and the big advancement was, can we do it? How can we do it and take images and text together and learn how they are matched? So that we have an image like this, and we automatically generate its description without passing through the image analysis part. And then, when you have this idea, you could also think, can we do the vice versa? Because if you have a way that matches images with text, since in the computer both things are numbers, can we also do vice versa? It seems more difficult. Of course, you have much more pixels in the image than text to describe them, so it's not exactly one-to-one thing, but it's still numbers to numbers. You're translating things. And this is where the things are getting interesting. And then already here, we have two very different sources of data that usually don't talk to each other, except in our mind or in the way we are interacting among ourselves. There are images, vision, what you obtain from our retina or what you can get from cameras, and language. And when you open this vase of different modalities and different sources coming from different domains, vision and language, you can basically think of, well, now that I have vision, images, and language, I can have whatever I have data for. If they represent similar thing, I can match them. And so this is one of the basic idea, going from data that represent the same thing, images or language or different languages, to things that are representing completely different, they're not representing, they're representing the same thing, but with completely different modality, and trying to put them together. And of course, in what you see every day and all the hype around large language models and OpenAI versus Google versus Meta and so on, they're all concentrating on vision and language together. But in principle, you can have whatever you think. In material science, for example, you can put together chemical structure of physics with property of the material that could be completely separated. I don't know, electrodynamic properties with chemical structure. And you can try to understand how you can translate one into the other or generate one from the other. So to design better materials, for example. So, and the more different are the modalities and the sources, the more heterogeneous are the inputs, and the more challenging are to make sense of their combination. But the general idea behind that is always the same. So these are usually what are thought to be the challenges when you need to put together data from different modalities. We'll be concentrating on a couple of those. But basically, the first challenge is how we can give, I want to describe Miguel, for example. And I can take a picture of him, or I can describe it by language. Or I can try to have a picture and the language together that might giving some different views of the same person. And they complementing their information to have a better understanding and better description of what he is. And this is a challenge of representation. How do I put together information from two different sources or from different modality to have a better representation or a more consistent representation of one thing. The second challenge is called alignment. And the idea is, if I have, again, two descriptions, different modalities of the same object or the same person, how can I make sure that their two description is consistent, so they're telling the same thing? I cannot put together an image of Miguel and describing Ines, for example, because they don't match. And so the challenge is, I would like to have a system that is able to understand and to put together things that are consistent and take or keep apart things that are different and are not consistent. And this is the basic of multimodality. This is what underscore all the results we have today about multimodality and multimodal results. And then when we have this, we can use the description we have for extracting causal model, reasoning about objects, or, as you have seen, generating text from images or images from text, or even what is called transference, that is a very complicated word or very unusual word for saying a very simple thing. Sometimes one of the modality is cheap and one of the modality is expensive for any kind of reason. Could be patient safety, could be cost, money, could be availability in remote settings, for example, since we're talking about medical domain. And the idea in, can we use, when we learn the way the two modalities are close together, are interacting, can we use this information to use the cheapest modality to generate some information about the most costly modality, so that you can use the cheaper one when I don't have the expensive one, and get some kind of information similar to the high cost one. A little bit about this and the caveat about this at the end of the talk. So we will be concentrating on this part here today as the basic of how it's going on behind the scene or under the hood of all these systems. And I will give you then some ideas and some applications that are already kind of studied or in development. So, how it started with text. So, when you read a book or when you try to speak something that you are trying to explain, you have already in mind a kind of idea of what you're going to explain. So you have context. Whereas usually the old way in which language processing were developed was, somehow it still is, even if larger, but is, okay, I'm just looking at words that are close enough to what I want to say next. And then I try to predict the next more likely word. And the amount of sentences or text that you were feeding us, what I already said, the context, was basically telling you how much information you have about what you're saying for predicting in a reasonable way the next word. So if I only use one word for predicting the next one, and my word is the, could be the apple, the car, the airplane, the person, could be whatever. But if I have more context and say, yesterday in London was cold and was, I don't know, could be freezing, snowing, but I'm restricting the possibilities. And the more context I give to a system, the more I can predict correctly the next words and make language and generated text or the understanding of text more consistent and better. So this was how it was usually done. So the way it was done, it was I take a book, for example, and I see how many times these close to car in the book, how many times these close to Apple in the book, how many times cold is close to London in the book, and how many times, if I take two words apart, how many times these triplets or couple of words are present in the book. And then I adjust a huge table of possibility, of probabilities of any pairs of words, any triplets of words, any quadruplets of words appearing in the book. So that when I was asking, can you interpret me this text, the system was extracting triplets and quadruplets of words and saying, oh, if I have this, then go in the lookup table and say, oh, this has the probability of being this and means this. So it was kind of very crude way. And what happens in 7 years ago, 2017, well, someone say, okay, can we do something better? Because this is very static. Once I learn the probability, there's no way I can change that. Can I make things that adapt also to the context? Because maybe if someone has a different way of speaking than some others and use more or less frequently some words. And the idea is going from this very crude way of representing text to what is called self-attention. And we'll be looking at, but this is the basic of all large language modules, except DeepSeek, that is using some other machinery internally, but it's still the basic of all the large language models that are today and of many of the vision models that you'll be seeing around. How it is working. So this is a very complicated diagram, very, very complicated, but the idea is this. So you have a sentence. I do not like it. You don't like this diagram, I guess. And computers understand only numbers. So I need to translate each word in some kind of number. But this is, I wouldn't say it's easy, but still is something that you can do. The dictionary of the English language has, I don't know, 40,000 words. So at the most you need, if you need to map everything, is 40,000 numbers. So you can do that. And then the idea, you take this thing and you say, okay, these are just numbers, and basically the whole idea of learning is to have a system that at the end of the day, when it has learned how to deal with language, either it is able to fill in the blanks. So if you, for example, mask this, take out this word and say, oh, what is the word that is most likely to go there? It can give you a reasonable answer. Or if you say, oh, the starting of the sentence is I do, just provide me with a continuation. That is basically what you're doing with prompting ChatGPT. You're starting a sentence or a paragraph and say, continue. Just give me an answer. That is the continuation of your text. And for doing this, context is crucial. And this is why ChatGPT and all the evolutions, or if you use Meta, you use Gemini, or whatever you use, Mistral or Claude, whatever you're using, the most modern, the most recent way of just saying, oh, instead of using a context of, I don't know, 8,000 tokens, 8,000 words, let's say, we're using 16,000 because it's increasing the amount of context it's giving you for continuing, for getting an understanding of what is reasonable as answer. Still remember, 16,000 or even 20,000 is much less than a book. So when you read a book and you arrive at the end of it, you remember how it started. Large language models don't. So this is one limitation, but this is another topic. Anyway, the idea is, how can we have a system that learns the context and how things are interlaced, how words are interlaced with each other. And the idea is, we have these small things here that are saying, oh, if I have this word here, and then I have all these other words, each of them have some influence on each other. And this arrow here are what are linking the influence with one word to the other. And basically, this part is saying, oh, if I have the word I, then the influence of having do or having not in third position, like in the position, is modeled by this arrow. And all these things here that you see, the yellow, violet, and blue things, are numbers. And these are the things that are learned during the process. So when something like this, you throw a lot of sentences with 5 words, these numbers here at the end of the learning are what are modeling the relationship between words. Saying, oh, if I have this word, then the next one will probably be this other one. So, and here I have one arrow from the first letter to kind of modulating every other. So saying, oh, if you have this I as the first word, what will be the other one? And then I do the same thing for all the positions. So now I have, if I have do in the second position, what is the likely relationship with the first one, and with the third one, fourth one, and fifth one, and so on. And this is the basic, and this is called attention mechanism, because here we have a multiplication. So we have a number here that is multiplying, basically this number here, that is the number corresponding to the word do. And the idea is, if the score that you have together is high, then I have something that is close to 1 that is multiplying the word do, so I will pass on the word do. If I have a very unlikely word here, in the context of this sentence, the score that I will get from I will be low. So that word will be multiplied by a small number, let's say 0.1. So the probability of that being passed on as the correct word will be very small. So this is the basic idea of attention. Attention, because I will put attention to the most important words that are outputted or are present in my sentence. And this is basically just a machinery for doing things. The important thing of this, to remember, that will be important for the multimodal thing, is that these are these multiplications, basically. And these multiplications are taking, so I'm representing words and sentences, actually not with just one number, but with a certain amount of numbers, a vector. And the idea is that multiplications are evaluating how vectors are similar. So basically, I'm saying, oh, you have 2 vectors are very similar. It means that the 2 words are goes very well together. So the attention is very high. For them, is very high. So multiplication is similarity in our context. Okay, so this is the way now it is trained, because usually for vision, for example, or for text, you need to have a huge amount of data, of images, with labels all around saying, oh, you have a person, if you have a bridge, if you have a car, and so on. But this is very time-consuming and very complicated, especially if you want to do it at scale. So what was found is that instead of having this labeling of saying, oh, text represents something good, something bad, or so on, it is much more effective to have a system that tries to understand how you fill in the blank. You predict single pieces of that. So I do not, if you scramble things or if you mask things, the system will learn how to predict the correct word. And then, suddenly, you don't have any need for any labeling. You can just take any text you found around in the internet, in the library, wherever. You just throw at your system and says, learn the relationships between words by filling the blanks. So, and you go around and you go on and on and on by randomly taking out words and asking the system to predict the correct one. And this is how large language models are trained. So now they have, it's only one layer of attention. Large language models have many, many, but each one of them is doing the same thing. Taking input data, masking part, predicting the output. Now, where multimodal is going? Now you have a system that is able to predict things and to align text and understand context. And one thing you can ask is, well, numbers are numbers. I represent language with numbers. Images are already numbers. Speech or music is already numbers. Can I throw this kind of data at a system like this and learn in the same way? And this was the first idea around, can I get things that are taking different modalities? And you can have language, images, and speech together, or everything aligned as input. And then you have a huge self-attention mechanism trying to make sense of all possibility. Unfortunately, let's say you have a language with 40,000 words. The worst you can do is just one number per word, so 40,000 numbers. So even if it's huge, very suboptimal, not very efficient, it can work. But if you take an image, and, well, what is the most rubbish camera you can get in a phone today? 1 megapixel? 4 megapixels? So it means you have not 40,000 numbers, but you have 4 million numbers, and the numbers can take any number between 0 and 255. So just by adding a relatively small image, standard image, as input, you increase the complexity immensely, just for the sheer amount of data that you're getting. Not thinking to input videos, that is basically images in time, or, well, music or speech in terms of audio. So even if the idea was nice, the complexity was overwhelming. So how can we do that? Because the idea is still nice. We have the machinery. Can we do something for that? And the idea is, this is a very famous paper, and an image is worth 1,000 words. 16 by 16 pixel images are worth 1,000 words. And the idea is, well, images are complicated. But what happens if instead of using as basic brick of the image, the pixel, I use just a smaller image? Then I can control the complexity of things. And then I have my 1 megapixel, 4 megapixel images. I divide into 16 by 16 squares, small squares. And I use any of the model that I have for classifying images, for example, train the initial ones, something like the things that we're doing this. And I use this machinery to take my small patches, my small regions of each image, and describe it by a finite number of numbers. And suddenly, everything is under control. because now the number of patches for each image is finite, it's controlled. The number of the amount of numbers I use for representing each image is fixed. And then if it is a little bit more complicated, everything is fine. Then I'm adding a little bit of tricks to say, oh, this part here was on the top left, well, this part here was on top right, so that the image makes sense. It's not just a jigsaw that everything is interchangeable in terms of position. But these are just technical tricks, but the idea is I divide the image in patches as if they were single words. I represent these patches, these regions with numbers. I can throw transformers. And this is vision transformers. So exactly the same thing as we've seen before, but applied to images. And then suddenly these things becomes feasible. I have a big transformer. One part is dealing with language, and one part is dealing with images. When they arrive here, they're just numbers that are crunched by the transformer learning, that is learning not only the relationships, the attention and the relationships between words and words, but also between words and part of the images, and part of the images with part of the images, and so on. So it's really learning the interrelationships between all parts of the images and how language is representing them and vice versa. What is the disadvantage of this? Is that in all my training set, I need to have everything matched together. So I need to have a lot of images with matched text. So somehow the system is nice, it's feasible, I can use it, but I go back to the problem of having a curated data set. I cannot just gather all images from the internet and all text from the internet and using the self-training, the self-supervised training that I've seen before, in which I mask things and just need to be predicted, because I need to have a subset of the all possible data in which text and image are really representing the same thing, are matched. So I'm downsizing my possibilities. What could I do? Because there's a challenge. I have a system that might work, that is working, but then gathering data is difficult and it's expensive. So the idea is, well, I go back to what I had before and say, well, instead of training everything together, I first have a system that deals only with language, so I can exploit all the language that is available on the internet. And then I have another system that is only with images, that I can again exploit all images that I can find, because they just learn to fill in the blanks and extract reasonable things. And then I fix those, and I use them as what is called encoder. So I transform a text into a number that is representing the text, and I transform images in numbers that are representing the image. And now the cross-modality learning is not dealt by the visual transformer that is or the language transformer that is inside here and inside here, but is learned by this kind of table that is looking, oh, if I have this number for representing my sentence and this other number for representing my image, how likely they are to be relevant for what I need to represent. And you do this kind of table looking at how things are similar or dissimilar for language and image for all the data for which you have matched caption and image. But then the space you are exploring in terms of possibility of interconnectivity is much lower than what you had before, because it's already constrained. And you assume that the information that is extracted from this image and from this text are already capturing the important things. So the idea is you learn all this table so that when you have, then when you're using it, you say, okay, you say you have this image, and you say, I have a photo of, and then you need to fill in the blank. And again, remember, multiplication is similarity. So you multiply this encoding by all the possible combination that could reasonably fill this blank. And the one with the highest value, the highest likelihood or similarity, is the one that you will pick. And this is the basic of CLIP, the constructive language image pre-training, that is used in Midjourney, I think, for generating images from text and vice versa. I check, but and then there are a lot of evolution of this, but this is the basic. So you use two different systems for representing, for extracting what is important for images and text, and then you only need to match these things rather than general text and general image. And now we're moving to biomedical domain, because when you have this, and you can match together images and text, the first thing that came to mind, even to Joshua Benjo, was, oh, you know what? No radiologist needed in 10 years. And say, because, why? Because we could take the images, we throw the images at a vision language model, and we get a radiologist report. We are still working. So Benjo said this 10 years ago, well, 8 years ago. We are still working towards this. People are still working towards this. But the idea is, in principle, under certain conditions, in specific cases, training very carefully, you could have a reasonable report highlighting what is important from images into text. Or vice versa. In principle, you could say, okay, I would like to have a representation of a chest X-rays with some specific conditions. And the input is text. And just disregard what is inside, but this is basically a generative model, something that is generating images of chest X-rays from a lot of training data. And here you have some conditions that are tweaking the appearance of the generated image. Text translated into image. Again, different modalities. So you can go from one to the other, or from the other to the first one, kind of in a continuous way. In such a continuous way that sometime you can think, well, I could generate images with specific conditions. Could be diseases, could be anatomical differences, could be whatever you think or you like. You can generate images, and if they resemble, if they're very realistic, you could use these for training other systems. And this is what the whole domain of synthetic image generation or synthetic patient generation for testing things or for testing AI systems. What we've seen so far is basically using images and text, going from images to text or vice versa, but medical domain and, well, life is much more than image and language. And if you think in the medical domain, you have images, of course, but you have omics data, a lot of omics data. You have metabolomics. You have digital health records, that is text again. You have wearable biosensor signals from all kinds of places in our body. You have ambient sensors to study movement, for example. And you have environmental conditions and environmental variables. If you live in a polluted city or not a polluted city with high CO2 or low CO2 or microparticulate and so on and so forth. But even in the other modality or in the target thing that you would like, you have much more than text. Because you could have digital twins. You would like to generate models of, holistic model of a patient or part of the patient. You can have hospital at homes, you can have digital health. You can have many more things than just understanding text or understanding sentiments. And the problem is, how can I tackle these challenges? And especially, what are the specific things that are different when I use images and text from the medical domain than when I use medical text for captioning or in the natural world? Because this is the crucial. And the thing is that, and the thing is, the fundamental difference of images and text that we have in the medical domain, biomedical domain, is what is driving the challenges that are not yet met. So, just to give you an idea, and again, this is important to understand because this is part of why things are not working and why there are still challenges. So, the way we have seen so far that vision and text are encoded is through transformers and to self-supervision, because I want to have a lot of data and fill in the blanks, basically. And when it comes to multimodality training, I have some different strategies. So one is I take two different encoders, similar to CLIP, and I just want to see how can I make representations of images and text be similar when they need to be similar, and apart when they're representing different things. The other possibility is I have my encoder from vision, my encoder for text, in this case, just for simplicity. And then I try to use another transformers, masking part of one and part of the other, and from the remaining information from the two modalities together, predicting the missing things of the two modalities. So I'm masking these things, and by using the remaining information from images and text, I try to predict what's missing from image and from missing from text. This is putting together the two modalities. The other possibility, and these are linked to more generative approaches, in which I use one modality to generate the other, or vice versa. Or one modality with some textual information, the condition we have seen before when I was generating the chest X-rays, to generate something else. These are what are mostly used in multimodality for now. And this is what is driving the caveat and for using those. And again, now that ChatGPT has launched this Health GPT, again, I should have taken it off records. No, kidding. No. Okay. Last two things that goes in a little bit in the technicalities is what we've seen so far is that we have some kind of encoding on one side, encoding on the other, and then trying to put them together. There are two possibilities of putting things together. One, remember, deep learning models, AI models today, are basically layer after layers of processing at different level and with a kind of hierarchy. CNN transformers, both of them, have this kind of layering architecture. So you could think about saying, okay, I have the two modalities. I put them together into my system or into parallel system, but they need to talk to each other. Because in this way, during the learning phase, I can exploit the mutual or the information that is, put them in relationship, or link them at each layer in my architecture. And this is called early fusion strategy. So you have the two modality here, the two architecture analyzing and processing this data, the input data. And each time I have a layer of processing, I have a block that is trying to make sense of what is similar and what is dissimilar between the two modalities while it is learning. And this is a very powerful mechanism, because in this way, the idea is I can extract all the nuances about the relationship and the links between the different modalities. And I pass them on as I'm learning down the line with more and more abstract representation. Again, exactly as in the captioning modality, the problem is I need to have everything present before training. So if I'm using pathology and genetics, I need to have millions of slides and millions of genetic information from the same patients, the same tissue, to do this. And this, especially in the biomedical domain, is very unlikely. Usually you have scattered things. You have pathology slides by the bucket, radiology slides by the bucket, PET sparingly, well, unless you use FDG, that all cancer patients get. But if you have more advanced PET, sparingly. If you have omics, it's very expensive. You have a lot for cancer, but then all the rest of diseases are very, very fewer. So, and so on. So it is difficult to have a huge data with all the data you need for the training. And so that's the strategy, and the one that is most widely used just for data availability reasons, is what is called late fusion. So you have a system that deals only with one modality, a system that deals only with the other modality. This could be pre-trained on a lot of data. And then you make the fusion and understanding of what's important for the multimodal system for your specific task only at the end. So that in principle, you can have a lot of data for this part, a lot of data for this part, and then the pair of data, the coupled data you need is only useful for this last part here. And you can deal with that. It is just a subset of the learning, so even if you have less data, you can still do that. Okay, these are the basic things. Transformers, how to put transformers together, and how to fuse the information together. And at the back of your mind, always remember attention mechanisms, transformers, that are using self-attention or cross-attention, are using multiplications between features or between numbers. Multiplication means you're looking for similarity. So, one of the most explored things in multimodal in biomedicine is the fusion between pathology slides and genomics. Just also because one of the biggest data set that is publicly available, the TGCA from the NIH, is from cancer patients as pathology slides and genetic information. And the idea is, if you look at here, there are two things. One, if you have a transformer for the pathology slide, a fully connected network, basically a classical neural network for the genetics, because you have no idea of how it can be organized. These are trained separately, and then the fusion is just at the final stage, when the two information are coming together for the task that you like. Survival prediction, risk prediction, therapeutic effect prediction, something like that. Signal and imaging, again, completely different domain, completely different type of data. Here you have fMRI, again, signals, but a lot of signals, one signal per voxel. And then you have electroencephalography, and you need to put them together. Again, you have processing of fMRI, processing of EEG, and then you put them together. Here is more complicated because you don't only have space or only one dimension, like it was for pathology that you image, and genetics that you have just the sequence of amino acids. Here you have temporal dimension and spatial dimension for fMRI, a temporal dimension for EEG. Well, multiple because you have multiple electrodes, but it's one temporal dimension per electrodes. So you need to take care of them. So the architecture is more complicated, but it is the same. So you process one, you process the other, and then you try to put everything together here. Here's the fusion. Again, CT and imaging. And the idea of this is also, when I have pathology and slides, can I imagine a system in which I have a CT and I put on top of the CT the slides of the tissue I've extracted? So to have a clear representation of the specific tissue that I'm analyzing from both modality. But the idea is always the same. Okay, and now we go into the challenge. This again is video and imaging. Again, video is imaging in time, and then you have pathology, and you need everything together. Again, here is the processing of one, processing of the other, and you're putting everything together. The important thing, the thing that you like, and you will get to that in a moment in the challenges, is that every time, so there are two things. One, we started with vision and text. And the most obvious things and the first thing that was thought in the biomedical domain, can we generate a radiology report from images? That is exactly as captioning images. So we know that the text should represent the image, and the image should represent the text. There's no uncertainty about that. It might be a good representation or a bad representation, but we know that they're matching. Every time, in all the examples I've shown so far, this is a kind of fuzzier, because you're not exactly sure if the pathology is representing exactly what's happening in the mucosa and vice versa, or you're not exactly sure if the genes that you're analyzing, the genetics you're analyzing, are all linked to the pathology slides that you're using, and you don't know how much they are linked. Because the link could be so far away that it's basically you're losing the relationship from a biological point of view. So it's a little bit more complicated because you're not exactly sure. And when you're putting together images and images, or images and genetics, the thing that you would like to see is that for any kind of outcome that you would like to have that putting together more modalities give you a higher performance for your final task. So if you're predicting survival, you would like to have a better separation between high-risk patients and low-risk patients. Or if you're scoring inflammation like here, you would like to have that one modality alone is worse than two modalities together. And this is something that is happening here, so everyone is happy. Endoscopic alone, 75% accuracy in detecting inflammation. Histology alone is 88%. And when you're fusing them together, you get 90%. 90 is also a good number. Clinicians are very happy. So there is another hidden challenge here. and the question mark, we will be getting. So you can think, if you get something that is not entirely right here, raise your hand or think about that. We'll getting back to that in a moment. So in biomedicine, these are the challenges that we have in general. So different modalities, different way of the same tissue, but we don't exactly know how they're linked. Biomarkers at different scales or from different modalities can be contradictory. One is telling there's inflammation, the other one is telling that there's no inflammation. How do you deal with that? If you don't have a third opinion or a third modality as a ground truth. And then challenges for deploying things that are multimodal. Because in many clinical settings, you can say, I have this fantastic multimodal things that taking endoscopy and genetics, for example, gives you a very high performance for stratifying patients. But what happens if you deploy that in a setting where there's no genetics? When the genetics is so expensive that when you take the biopsy, they cannot do genetics sequencing. Can you still use your system somehow, or you need to throw it away? Because we would like to develop something that can deal with missing modalities. It can get you some results, even when there are missing modalities. But even in this case, since you have this partial diffusion here, if you eliminate one of those, you say, if I eliminate these, I would like at least to have the results that I got from endoscopy alone. But since this is then inextricably linked, you cannot just put everything to 0 here, as if there was nothing. Because 0 doesn't mean nothing. It means there's something that is not, and there is no problem. There's nothing. So it will bias your results. So how can you do that? And finally, costs. If you need to gather data, multimodal data, they're expensive. Clinical data is expensive. Lab data and pathology data, transcriptomics data, even more expensive. And doing prospective studies is excruciatingly lengthy and expensive. So these are all challenges. And some way I had, just to give you a way of thinking what would be worth working, in my opinion. Everything so far has worked with bimodal fusion. Vision and text, genetics and pathology, imaging and one imaging modality, another imaging modality, and so on. But what if I have 2, 3, 4, 5 different modalities? I would like to put them together to have even a better stratification and better understanding of a patient at different scales, maybe. Organ level, tissue level, cellular level, genetics, all the pipeline. Can I do that? What kind of data do I need? How do I put them together? Because all the things, CLIP, for example, that is taking the matrix of all possible combinations. It's fine if you have 2 sets of data. But if you have 3, it gets a cube. And if you have 4, it's an apicube. And suddenly, if you have 5 or 6 modalities, you're exponentially increasing the complexity of the all possible relationships and making learning very, very hard. So how can you do that without doing all possible combinations? And then, well, there's the problem of missing modality. And then the problem is what I was hinting before. In captioning, it's very clear what is a correct caption and the correspondence between the image and the caption. But when you're putting together medical information, everything get a little bit more complicated. And for example, here we have a set of data from the same patient. One level, one imaging is telling this patient is fine, no inflammation at the mucosal level. Then take a biopsy, because you always take random biopsies for surveillance, and you say, oh, actually there is neutrophil infiltration, so there should be some kind of inflammation. But the patient, from a clinical and endoscopic perspective, no problem. So what do? Is inflamed or is not inflamed? Should I treat him or her, or shouldn't I treat her or him? And this is a fundamental question, because it is linked to managing the patient, stratifying the patients. And maybe things are a little bit more complicated in the medical domain, because the possible combinations is not just right or wrong. I can have the modalities that are consistent, the modalities that are inconsistent in some way, or inconsistent in some other way. And maybe it's just a different stratification of patients. But we don't know yet, because we don't have the prospective clinical trials are very costly. And this is the table I had before. So this is a more subtle problem. And this is a little bit more philosophical, maybe. But in the medical domain, you're dealing with the health of patients. So you would like to be sure what you're looking at. So what we did here was taking as ground truth for outcome the histological score, because this is the target for the clinical trials. So we train our endoscopic part that was taking the endoscopy video as input, and we train it to match the histology inflammation score. That is kind of long shot, but you can think, yeah, but maybe even in the mucosa, the high level with low magnification, you still have some hints and of things, visual hints that are linked to the actual thing that you see in histology, high magnification. Of course, accuracy was not so great, 75% accuracy. Of course, endoscopy is very far from histology, so you kind of expect that. And then you train histology alone, so you won't like to match histology data with histology-based score. You get 88%, much better. You get a great agreement with the reader. But when you put them together, and the fusion gave you 90%, and you say, why? So, of course, we are happy, because we say when we put the modality together, we should expect to have a better representation of the patient. But here, we are saying, oh, the score we're matching from histology is the one based on histological features alone. It's not a third-party evaluation, a clinical outcome evaluation. It's a histology score, so histology image-based score with histology data. Why things that were not so great? Why endoscopy is making things better than histology? Histology over histology should be the best we could do. Why it is improving? It is a question mark. We don't know. We are working on it, understanding what's happening. The other side of the problem is you have very nice architectures, and you say, oh, you have endoscopic data, with different views, different modalities, some advanced enhancement. Sometimes you don't have enhancement, you generate it synthetically. You do the fusion, everything is working perfectly. So modality 1 is 91%, modality 2 is 81%, so 10-point difference between the two modalities in terms of performance. Then you put them together, and the performance is in between. Why? You're putting information, you're fusing two kind of information. You expect that the output is at least as good as the best of the modality you're putting in. But it's not happening. Why? And the thing is, well, I think, just this already put this missing modality, how you deal with that. My feeling, there's no proof, no theory, no experiment still, but my feeling is that the thing is linked to the way we are training the models, or the visual, the self-supervised, the pre-training of the models. Well, not only because, and the attention mechanisms, because we are trying to align things from different modalities. So we are masking things, or we are making, well, the cross-modality learning, so that we can predict the missing part from here, from the other modality, and vice versa. And these are two problems, that if things are not aligned, so if the two modalities are telling slightly different things, we're forcing them to find an agreement, even if there's no agreement. And we cannot decouple the information that is specific to one modality, the information that is specific to that modality, and the one that is complementary, the one that are consistent between the two, so that we can make a decision about how to combine the things, and what is, or case by case, what is the added value of one modality versus the other. Because in principle, you could take, if you have these three separated information contribution, we could say, oh, the baseline is the commonalities, and then we need to deal with who's bringing the most added value. And something like this could have also other clinical interest that is linked to missing modality or management pipeline, but still we don't have it. And linked to this, there is another more deeper problem. Well, deeper problem. This is working for captioning in generative AI, but for predictive. And I give you a small tale about what we tried and didn't work. Well, but there is a reason. So, trying to do multimodality using genetics or clinical information and treatment regimes. So basically, the idea in pharmacology is, well, preliminary to have the drug into the market. You do pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic studies. So you know you deliver a dosage regime of a drug to the patient. You sample the blood or the tissue where the drug should be delivered, and you say, oh, in time, the concentration of the drug is this and this and that, so that you know if you get to the therapeutic concentration or to a safe harming concentration. So you have these curves, one for each patient, and then maybe you know what is the biophysical process that goes from injecting the dose or swallowing a pill to the concentration in the tissue, or maybe you don't know. But there is some process involved, some physiological or biophysical process that links the dosage regime to the kinetics or the effect of the drug. And the idea is, can we reduce or understand part of this variability with patient characteristics? Male or female, high or low BMI, expression or non-expression of P45 protein or enzyme, or genetics information, whatever. Can we understand if there is anything that is affecting these curves, so that we can understand and reduce the variability? So a step back, a work by a couple, well, in the brain, in the neuroscience domain, a lot of work has been done in trying to understand the link between neurological biomarkers, shapes and volumes of different regions of the brain, and genetics. And this is through usual bioinformatics association studies. You take volume of the hippocampus, you have the genetic of a lot of patients, and you see, oh, is there an association, so that if I have a specific SNP SNP or specific variations, I have an hippocampus that is larger and smaller, or an amygdala that is smaller, larger or smaller. And you have just a linear association. Presence or absence, or increase or decrease expression of a specific gene, and specific volume. And this has been done also for cardiac studies. And the idea at the beginning was, we take the MRI of the heart, the segment, we get the ventricles, we have the cine, so we know how it moves, and then we extract some features or characteristics for a specific region of the brain and say, of the heart, and say, oh, this part of the ventricle is moving this much during a cycle. Is this associated or not with some specific gene? And this was the study that were done. And last year, this was merged with AI. And the idea is, well, this is the same as before, but then instead of doing the association study with each part of the ventricle, they put this into an encoder, like we've seen before. An encoder, a transformer, whatever you like. And they used the encoded part, this part here. There is a small amount of numbers, much smaller than the one that you need to represent the surface of the ventricle. And they said, can we use this and make association studies between genes and this embedding encoded space, rather than the whole shape that is very complicated. And actually it was surprisingly nice. So they re-found known genes that were already known associated with specific movement or altered movement of the heart. And then they found a couple more that were associated with different aspects. But this was done in a kind of very bioinformatic. So this is the AI part, let's say, and this is the very classical bioinformatics. So you just run basically a correlation. It's not a correlation, but for the sake of simplicity, is a correlation. So a linear relationship. This is larger, more expression. This is smaller, lower expression, something like that. But idea here is, going back to our idea, is, okay, we do the same. So we take our concentrations, we do the encoder, and we have the embedding here. So this is small amount of numbers. And the idea is, well, we could do the association studies again, but in principle, we could say, okay, rather than do the association studies, can we use all the patient-specific information that we have, demographic data, clinical data, maybe omics, whatever you have, put them in a small network and generate the embedding. Because in principle, if you could do that, you could say, oh, I have a part that is completely explained, modeled by this, a part that is coming from here that is not explained, I put them together, and I know which of the variable is important and which is not. I need to regularize that, a lot of things, but in principle, if you do everything correctly, you'll have only the important variables that get to control this thing here. It's not working. It's not working because in bioinformatics, you are very, very tight. You have a very simple model that is just a line, a linear relationship, and you have very, very tight control on statistical significance of what you find. And you control because you have a lot of variables, so you control for multiple comparisons. Here we don't. We put everything together, and our little smart model is using all possible spurious correlations to get things done. So even if you put, and we did, put some random numbers, random variables here, as control. It is exploiting these values to reconstruct somehow this thing. And my feeling is that this is linked to this. That this thing is so powerful that they're trying to use all possible things they have, all possible numbers they have, to do the job done. Even if there is no justification. And the problem is, how can we model that? Because this is the problem. Can we separate the things that can be modeled by this part from the things that cannot be modeled? And this is another caveat about, and this is why I put here a CT, X-ray, and the PET. I'm done. Last slide. Ooh, wow. We're not okay. We're not okay. Yeah, last slide. So sorry. You should have told me. A small caveat here. Whenever you find someone that is claiming to give outcome or to generate something out of some input data, always think, is there any biological or physical justification why it should be working? Because sometimes there is no justification, and what you get is a plus, or what a friend in high-level institution called placebo AI. And one of the things that are recurring more and more is translating, and unfortunately I've seen also from one friend trying to do that. Can I generate a PET image from a CT image or from an MRI? Can we do that? Is there any physics or biology that can justify that I can find some hints of, even for FDG? I don't want to go to advanced radio tracers that are linking to specific, I don't know, receptors or something like that, but even for FDG, is there anything in MRI that can hint that there is a signal with a relationship to FDG consumption? So if there's no physics or no biology justifies it, what this is doing, how can I generate an MR from my PET except for having a nice market or a nice marketing stunt? And this is dangerous. And this is dangerous. And I don't want to blame fellow researchers, but even, now I'm ranting. So first I thank you, then I rant. Okay, thank you very much. Rant for afterwards.
Well, thank you very much, Enrico. I was spellbound and listening, and the time has flown. Apologies, it's my fault because I'm the host supposedly, but I was just completely.
No, I should have warned you beforehand. But when I reach some time, just raise a hand, and say,
yeah.
Get to the end.
But okay, so thank you, Enrico. So we'll need to stop the public part. So I would ask. Okay, done. I'll switch this off, and I think we have a problem because they will have a class in 30 minutes.